Good morning and welcome to Sunday Supplement. On today's show, we discuss whether June the 30th is a realistic date for concluding the football season here and across Europe. Is playing behind closed doors a feasible option, both practically and morally? Wayne Rooney says he's surprised the FA's not told clubs to keep players at home in accordance with government advice. Where does that responsibility lie? And calls are growing for those at the top of the game to prop up clubs lower down the pyramid. How could that work in practice? Well, joining us to discuss all of that are Henry Winter, Chief Football Writer at The Times. Oliver Holt is a Chief Sports Writer at The Mail on Sunday, and The Independent's Chief Football Writer, Miguel Delaney, also with us. Welcome to all of you. Now, don't forget, you can tweet the show at Sunday Sup, and we'll integrate those into the conversation during the course of the show. Now, at this point, this is where we always hold up the back pages to show you the top sports news story of the day. We could well have been showing you pictures of Liverpool, couldn't we? Perhaps in trophy mood. But unfortunately, given the current climate in the country, two of the back pages have government advice. NHS, coronavirus, isolate your household, stay at home. That's in both the Mirror and in the People. On the back of the Sun today, mortified. This is the Portsmouth defender Sean Raggett, who was told that he had COVID-19 while he was sitting in a pub. That was just a couple of hours after the government had said they were going to be closing pubs that night. So Portsmouth had tested all their players and 3 of them tested positive. Sean Raggett now saying he's absolutely mortified that he went to the pub in the first place. In the Times, really interesting column by Wayne Rooney today, which we'll go into detail of in due course. But he talks about how it goes against what the rest of the country is doing by having clubs such as Tottenham and others training this week, saying the advice from the government has been to work from home. So he thinks the FA should have actually told clubs they didn't have too much choice in the matter. There are other items in there which are worth talking about, and a couple of other columns. Jonathan Northcroft's column is excellent. We'll come on to that too. And Sunday Express, we will get the season finished and how the Premier League is planning to get matches played behind closed doors with a conclusion of, in theory, June the 30th. And both there and in the Star, they have a football story. They're saying that Tottenham are confident of keeping hold of Harry Kane until next summer. So, goodness gracious, these are very unusual times, aren't they, Henry Winter? So, in terms of UEFA saying that they're planning on getting the seasons across Europe concluded, if they possibly can, by the end of June, how likely is that?
Completely unlikely. I'm not sure. We've all been talking to people we know within the NHS, sources, friends. I got a text yesterday evening when it looked like, certainly from some of the newspaper reviews last night, that there had been almost a briefing or suggestion that they were going to try and get the Premier League up and running by June the 1st, so they could then finish it, have a short break and go into a new season. I mean, that's simply not going to happen. And this colleague that I know at the NHS was saying it is wishful thinking for football to even consider playing before the middle of October. And I think we have to look at what's going on the front pages. We have to look at the news from Italy. There's almost 800 deaths reported overnight. And the Prime Minister was saying we're 2 to 3 weeks behind Italy. We are staring into an absolutely horrific situation. So look, I admire what the football authorities are trying to do. They're trying to get the season completed. But I think that's going to be well into what we would consider next season, so from August onwards, before this season can be finished. And they're right to do that. The season, sporting integrity, contracts, whatever, that has to be continued next season. But the idea that football can go back, and I mean, Ollie's written a piece with Chris Wilde today, and there was an interesting piece next to it, I think it was from Gary Lewin, the sports therapist, former Arsenal, England, knows the game inside out. And he says, listen, it's going to take a bit of time for the players to get back up, running. So you're going to need to give the players at least 3 weeks before they can even resume playing again, psychologically, physically, tactically, all those issues. So honestly, you can't put a date on this yet. June the 30th is just so ambitious. With football, what it's got to focus on now is actually just making sure that the NHS gets all the support they need. This idea that you can play behind closed doors, when actually all the emergency services, all the medical crews are needed and to be needed increasingly by an not under fire, but a well-stressed, well-pressed NHS. And that's what football should be thinking of. We shouldn't be thinking about kicking a ball again. It will happen. Life will return to normal. But it could easily be 6 months from what the government scientific advisors are saying and from what people within the NHS, who are the ones in the front line. And what football should be thinking about now is what an amazing job the NHS are doing. They are fighting a war against this virus out there, and the thought of kicking a ball about should just be at the back of everyone's mind at the moment.
And whenever it is possible to kick a ball around in front of people, or at least officially, there will have to be that mini pre-season, as Gary Lewin here, former Arsenal and England physio, points out. They'll need at least a couple of weeks of strength and conditioning work, amongst other things. How do you see it panning out?
In a very similar way to the way that Henry's just outlined. I think, unfortunately, our leagues, football in general, is still in a little bit of denial about what's going on here. And the idea that players should be reporting for this, as Henry says, this kind of mini pre-season training thing in a couple of weeks is just, I find it absurd. I mean, we're talking, again, as Henry said, we're talking about how in a couple of weeks we're going to be seeing all the best medical advices, we're going to be seeing an explosion of these cases. And the agonies that that's going to bring. And so to be talking about players reporting back for training around that time, I find it absurd. I mean, we're looking, for instance, now, I think, the Olympics are due to take place still at the moment. I think their opening day is Friday, the 24th of July. It's becoming evident that's increasingly untenable. Athletes can't train. Why should footballers... I think footballers don't exist in a vacuum. They're human beings too. They have families, they have older relatives. They need to be safe too. We sometimes think that they're immune from these things because of the money they earn, but they're not. They have the same concerns as the rest of us. And to ask footballers to go back into a workplace when maybe the rest of us wouldn't go into that workplace, I think it's verging on the kind of bizarre. And as I say, I think we're in denial, and I think the kind of timeframes we're looking at are not 2 weeks. They're not finishing the season by the end of June. It's much more. I think, as Henry says, we're looking. I think we're looking at several months before there's any chance of really of football coming back.
I think anybody who's seen those reports from Italian hospitals that we've seen over the news. Stuart Ramsey did an extraordinary report on Sky News about what's going on there, with not enough beds, even not enough ventilators, and nurses and doctors having to choose which patients they can save. And then football's talking about June the 30th. Just explain why that date is the one that they're talking about.
Well, ultimately, I suppose it's traditionally been the cut-off point for every single season. Also with UEFA, it's been, I think, that why it's so important that A, they pushed back to Euros, and B, decided that the Champions League would essentially be postponed indefinitely, because every season has to be anchored to who gets into their main competition. But all this, I mean, really, they can put out all these dates they like, but they all just feel like time-buying exercises. Because, I mean, it's amazing to think about it now, and it's even more amazing to think that we attended the Liverpool-Atletico Madrid game just less than 2 weeks ago. And there was an element of, as you say, denial about it, and this kind of rush to try and, well, we have to offer clarity for the game, we have to sort everything out. Whereas all they can do is really just try and wait and see. I think that's what these dates come down to. But it's all about buying time, really. But ultimately, they're fairly meaningless and a little bit arbitrary, because I think, as Sheffrin said during the week, the UEFA president, it's not up to us. It's essentially down to the experts and the virus.
But also, footballers are falling ill all the time. So how can you actually, that means, I mean, as we were walking in here, Ollie and I were just sort of looking at the news, and the breaking tab was Marouane Fellaini has tested positive overnight. Dybala, Paolo Maldini. The issue, I mean, you point out that headline, the issue at Portsmouth, 4 players there. And I'm sure we're going to see more of these. So that puts the date back even further and further. And I thought Gareth Southgate, who as always catches, hits the right note, I thought that letter that he sent around to England fans on Friday, I thought was absolutely spot on. Let's move the Euros, but actually let's focus on just sort of getting behind the NHS and not detracting anything from their efforts. And you can't have ambulances going to, being stationed outside football grounds just in case someone sort of breaks a leg when the NHS are dealing with such a crisis, basically.
I also think, Jackie, there's an element where, look, I do think when football comes back, whenever that will be, there'll be a great outpouring of relief and joy that something is over, because it will have suggested that it will suggest when the game does finally come back that that society has got through this thing. But I think in the meantime, and I know we as football fans, all of us, everybody's tribal, everybody loves the game, people talk about how important the game is, and it is, but I do think that the appetite amongst football fans is, people are looking at the bigger picture here, and they're realising, like all of us, beginning to realise, I think, quite what society's facing. And I think the appetite, these dates, as Miguel says, which feel increasingly arbitrary, it's almost like we're singing to keep our spirits up about, we'll come back on, back for this mini pre-season training, or back for finish by June the 30th. I think, the general public think, actually, it's kind of insulting to everybody, really. People's minds are not on. People don't really want to think. Even those of us who love football as an escape, love sport as an escape, people don't really want to think about football coming back yet.
Do you think that's partly why they've given a date such as that, just like they did initially, April 3rd, and we all went, that's not going to happen, and spoke to everyone in the game, and they all went, that's not going to happen?
Yeah.
Is it because footballers, football fans, the football industry needs something to focus on, needs a date to focus on initially? Or is it, with the June the 30th date, that it's financial?
Well, I'm sure, if in doubt, it's about money, and I'm sure that a lot of it is financial. But I guess it's also about things are changing so fast, and I think we're sort of adapting so fast. As Miguel says, 2 weeks ago we were still going to football matches. People were going to, tens of thousands of people were going to Cheltenham Racecourse together.
Charlie Austin, he got coronavirus from Cheltenham.
Yeah, so the thing is moving so fast, and I think football is giving these dates. But even from the time when they gave this date, that just looks silly now. And it looks absurd. And I think that we are getting to grips with these behavioural changes and the way that things are happening. We are, realising that we're at the beginning of this, not anywhere near the end, and that things are probably going to get worse. And so yes, these dates, I think pretty soon we're going to stop giving these dates and just accept that actually this is going to be quite a long hiatus.
There's a bit of a strange double think, though, isn't it? Because on one side, obviously, we all have greater concerns, and we fully know, we're beginning to realise the magnitude of all this. And on the flip side, it's essentially, millions of people with suddenly a lot of time in their hands, and there's that sense that football would offer, or even having games on TV would offer some semblance of normality. But of course, it's a completely abnormal time, and I completely agree. I think I really can't see football come back for quite some time.
In fairness to the sort of Premier League and the authorities, from their point of view, they're also sitting there looking at this horrendous situation with lawyers.
Yeah.
That is the problem, and as Ollie says, so much of it comes down to money. There's a television contract. We're in Sky. Let's acknowledge that. So they've got a difficult situation to look at. But it's a situation they have to look at, because also if you look down the pyramid, just talking to secretaries and players at League One and League Two clubs in the week, they are, if they don't resume playing soon and the turnstiles don't start turning, they are in huge financial problems. So as we all accept, it's going to be another sort of maybe 4 or 5 months. But the game also has to debate this and actually has to start supporting these smaller clubs, who some of them will go to the wall unless there's... I know the EFL have acted, the Premier League look like they might give more solidarity payments. So it's an important debate to have. But I mean, it's just impossible to know what football's going to look like at the end of it. But the most important thing, coming back to it again, all that matters is the nation and all its resources, all its finances, all its emotional support is behind the heroes, as Gareth Southgate called them, in the NHS, because that's what matters at the moment.
That's a key issue in terms of actually delaying the season as well rather than cancelling it, because delayed income is obviously different to just cancelled income. And I think it's why there's also this pressure to put dates on as well, to at least, I suppose, I mean, to potentially budget for money that could come in rather than write it off altogether. Because, and that's, as Henry says, the clock is actually ticking on some clubs now because, you know, their lifeblood's been cut off.
And with contracts, etc. A couple of interesting quotes from Wayne Rooney in his in his Times column, I should say. Sorry, Henry. He says, I wouldn't be comfortable playing a game knowing there are people dying or very sick because of coronavirus, and we're taking those workers away from the front line. And the issue of behind closed doors, which a lot of people are talking about, heard Ryan Lowe, Plymouth manager, saying, we don't want to be playing behind closed doors. But the issue, of course, is that when you play behind closed doors, says Rooney said here, still means bringing together a fairly large group of people. You've got players, coaches, technical staff, physios, camera crews, other media, bus drivers, staff at the ground, the chefs preparing the pre-match meal. If the game's away from home, you've got hotels, travel, all the risks associated with that. Football is the easy part. The problem is all the logistics that perhaps people who are sitting at home and enjoying the football don't see. He's right, is he?
Yeah, he's absolutely right. Football, as we were saying before, football doesn't exist in a vacuum. You know, all those things that he's mentioned, the travel, the bringing people together, all those things are important. Apart from which, you know, I get the idea of playing behind closed doors, and I've seen these ideas mooted of you could play matches in clusters at the same stadium, you know, back-to-back matches, so you would limit the number of medical staff, say, that would be taken away from the NHS or whatever. But I still think that the idea, and I guess Rooney kind of alluded to it there, so the idea of playing behind closed doors that you obviously suggests that you're going to accelerate something that you wouldn't be able to do with spectators. Now, apart from the idea of whether you should play with spectators or without, I still think there's something vaguely obscene about the idea that we'd be playing matches while the country's in crisis. I don't, as Rooney suggests there, I don't think players would want to do that. Players, you know, say they don't exist in a vacuum. They're going to have loved ones who are suffering, presumably, from this. They're not different to anybody else. And I just don't. Henry mentioned before, you know, players are falling sick all the time. That's not going to stop. That's going to keep happening.
They'll have to self-isolate, won't they?
They'll have to self-isolate, their teammates. I just think these ideas, I understand that we all work in the industry either more directly or more loosely than some others. I think there's an element of people trying to keep up their morale here, but actually the reality is that these ideas of playing behind closed doors in a few weeks' time, it's not going to happen.
OK, well, that's the end of part one. When we come back in part two, we'll be looking at what the football calendar may look like next summer. Hello and welcome back to Sunday Supplement. Now, what is the effect on the calendar? The football calendar, bearing in mind the fact that Euro 2020 has been put back a year, it will have inevitably knock-on effects, potentially for the Women's Euros, waiting for confirmation on that, what's going to happen in terms of the next domestic season after that. And in Ollie Holt's piece here in the Mail on Sunday today, little cheeky swipe at UEFA in there, Ollie. UEFA insisted last week the European Championship, now scheduled to take place in 2021, would still be known as Euro 2020. Sometimes the lengths modern sport will go to in order to prioritise merchandising and preserve products already made are so absurd they are hilarious. Oh, so cynical. You can't imagine you mean that.
I don't think it's particularly cynical. It's just obvious. Look, I think UEFA actually, in terms of the stuff we've been talking about, acted very decisively about cancelling the Euros. They didn't mess around with that. They saw what was happening. Unfortunately for them, these Euros were almost designed, calculated to be the worst possible tournament in terms of the coronavirus, because they're spread around so many countries, which is an absurd idea in the first place from Platini. But I thought fair enough. They acted decisively, and they've switched that to next year. And I hope that we are in a position to do it. Clearly, there are knock-on effects for other tournaments like the Women's Euros, and it'll be interesting to see where they end up, whether they decide to put them, to have a summer of football, which I can see that, and they play the Women's Euros maybe after the Men's Euros, and I can see the merits of that in that if indeed we are back playing football by next summer, then I can see the merits in that. And equally, I can see the merits in maybe having the Women's Euros the following year when they would have that summer more to themselves, because in theory, at least, we'll be playing a World Cup in the winter.
There's the Olympics as well, because we don't know what's going to happen, whether that gets moved from the summer. A lot of talk about it going to next summer, and of course, Phil Neville's women's team played then, so there's the Women's Euros as well. Not to mention, of course, the Qatar World Cup. So, what do you think, first of all, is going to happen in terms of the Women's Euros being moved?
I imagine that we put back to 2022, yeah. I think we'll see that across the board. Everything's delayed a year. I think all of this actually, is key as to why this season isn't cancelled as well, as regards to the calendar will look. Because I think, we've obviously discussed this at length, but there isn't really a satisfactory potential ending to this season, whereas it feels much fairer to try and play this season out and have a truncated 2021 season. At least then everyone's starting off, everyone knows what the situation is and starting off a fairer bat, which is why they've given the space for this one to go on, because then it's much easier to reassess once this is finally finished, even if that goes on until the end of the year, which feels increasingly likely.
I think it's highlighted how crammed the calendar is anyway. I completely agree with Meg and your point about this moving the Euros has given the game the breathing space. Again, we're completely guessing about dates, but say that this season, 1920, is finished towards October, November, and then the players have a break and they come back. I agree, your word truncated is completely right. You could squeeze the league season in if you're prepared to sacrifice the League Cup, and you say, right, reserves and the kids go in there anyway, which often happens anyway. FA Cup, 2 rounds of replays disappear, but also you play games on the same night. So actually you don't have this almost like a sort of gentleman's agreement that you don't play Premier League games on Champions League night, and you could actually squeeze it all in. I completely agree with you. For sporting integrity, to keep the lawyers at bay, the sort of fairness throughout the leagues for Leeds fans who are hoping for promotion right throughout the divisions. We can't have an asterisk against this season. It has to be played out, and if that means almost sacrificing or certainly truncating, to use Meg's word, next season, then completely right. Just on, you were talking about the Women's Euros being delayed a year. Where does that leave Phil Neville? Because I think, as I understand, his contract finishes at the end of 2021.
To get extended, wouldn't you?
Well, probably, but I know, reading a lot of people who know far more about women's football than I do, there's a debate about Phil Neville's management. So I mean, that
He'll
then
be
becomes
judged
an
on major
interesting thing.
tournaments, won't he? That's
Sure.
the issue. But he needs to play them to be able to be judged on them.
Yeah,
so that's I
that's a
think,
fair
the
point.
theory of extending the contract. Perhaps nothing's been said on that yet.
So,
But I
sorry,
mean,
you think he will get a contract extension to take in that extra year?
would expect so, bearing in mind he's being judged on major tournaments.
Yeah.
And She Believes Cup it's an invitational, and so he's had the Women's World Cup where he reached the semi-finals. So it would be strange to get rid of him. There's no appetite to either
Right.
in the meantime. But looking at how the calendar might look, is it possible, do you think, is it realistic that, say the Premier League and the domestic season's completed towards the end of this year sometime, there's a break, that then it could be during the next calendar year that the next season is played and then finishes just before the Qatar World Cup in November 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible, and I've seen these suggestions that, and also it's happening in the States actually with the NBA season, that people are suggesting that maybe you use this misfortune that's happened to recalibrate a season and turn it into a January to January season. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I think in some ways it's a period of particular uncertainty because we were already facing disruption to the way that the season's played because of the Qatar World Cup taking place in the winter. So, we are entering in just purely in terms of the football calendar and the effects of coronavirus plus the effects of the Qatar World Cup. And there's a period of huge kind of uncertainty where it's incredibly difficult to know what's going to happen because it's just so difficult to know when we're going to come back. I mean, I think there's, as Miguel was saying, we've had this debate a lot about what happens to this season. I take Henry's point about the asterisk. I think there's going to be an asterisk against this season anyway. I mean, it's
It'd be very large.
It's a season. It's a season.
If it's cancelled or voided.
It will, absolutely, and I really don't think it should be voided. And I can see the benefits, and I wrote about the benefits of freezing the season as it is. I still think that the best option, if we can complete the season, is to complete the season.
But Ollie, if you freeze
whenever
it,
that's
done.
done.
The lawyers will come flying in.
I know, Henry. I agree. And like I say, I think if a resumption is possible, whenever that is, then that's the best solution.
Henry touched on this there in terms of this showing how packed the football calendar is, and it was already under huge tension. And it did feel like a bit of a reckoning for the football calendar was coming for some time, which was going to be exposed by the FIFA Club World Cup. And obviously this is something that's been building for some time. Klopp has complained about it, Guardiola's, pretty much every top-level manager has. And it felt like the Club World Cup was going to be, which was due for China next year, was going to be the issue that finally maybe caused the game to split. And obviously, again, this is small in the grand scheme of things, but one of the issues this crisis has exposed is this problem. And it's amazing now, once all this has come up, that suddenly FIFA have just so willingly, an issue that was previously totally unmoving is now, well, that can be moved.
Just on Ollie's point about merchandising and the whole sort of UEFA thing, Euros will obviously be moved to 2021. That's completely right. But actually, to have all this merchandising with Euro 2020 on it, sitting in bunkers somewhere in Switzerland, why don't UEFA just sort of make a positive out of negative and just go and sell it? Because I'm sure there'll be an appetite to sell it. You give all the proceeds or percentage of the proceeds to, the amazing medical rescue operation for the world that's going on at the moment. And then, just looking at it from UEFA's pursuitive perspective, which has often got sort of Euros in their eyes, you then sort of bring out the merchandising for 2021. But really, we shouldn't be talking about money when people are dying.
No, that is the point. But I suppose from their point of view, they might want to sell the merchandising when they play the tournament, still call it Euro 2020. It's just in the wrong year.
The Germans call it 2020 plus one, something like that.
Well, the Germans are always so sensible in these
they're always
matters.
ahead of us.
We need to just listen to the Germans and we'll all be okay. Jonathan Northcroft, a very interesting column in the Sunday Times today. It's a letter to football. It gets a lot off his chest, actually. It's well worth a read. I think it must have been quite cathartic for him to have written it. But there are various things that he picks out as being wrong with the game, and the fact that this hiatus, that we're all sitting at home thinking about what football means to us, but actually it's an opportunity to reset potentially and do things very differently. Just picking out a couple of things that he says. He says about stop pricing pensioners out of stadiums or charging little kids 50 quid for a tiny replica shirt. He says stop avoiding tax, stop spending the price of 2 hospital wings every season on agents' fees in the Premier League and paying players £400,000 a week while advertising for unpaid interns and while having just 5 clubs sign up to the paying ordinary staff the living wage, various other items there. He says, how can you make a film saying no to racism in 20 languages when you fine entire countries less for racial abuse at games than you did Nicholas Bentler for wearing sponsored underwear? It goes on and on. Is this an opportunity now for football to reset, to really sit back and think? You know, you're talking about squeezing matches in and there isn't enough wiggle room to play every game, but do we need to look at the bigger picture here, Ollie? Is it an opportunity for us?
Well, I think we do look at the bigger picture anyway, and so some of those, obviously, those issues that Johnny is talking about there, you know, are explored regularly, and I suppose that the question is whether what is happening now and the crisis that we're facing for healthcare and the crisis that, you know, the whole coronavirus crisis, whether that prompts a reset in our lives generally, whether it, because it is going to force us, certainly in the short term, to change our behaviours, it's going to force us to change our social behaviours, it's going to force us to confront the idea that we have more free time, what we do in our lives, whether we get outside more, we spend more time with our families, it's going to prompt a reset in our lives, I think, and how much of that we take forward when hopefully the crisis is over, who knows? And the same thing, I suppose, goes to our attitudes to football. Does it mean that we think with more clarity about the things that are wrong with the game? We all know what they are, I think, and Johnny has, as you said, articulated very well many of the things that we feel are wrong with them. Does the advent of the virus and maybe 6 months off mean that we will be able to suddenly have a magic wand to tackle all those things, and that we will suddenly realise that paying Mino Raiola 30 million quid for a transfer is obscene?
Well, you think he hasn't earned it?
Does that mean that we can suddenly tackle that because of what's happened? I'm not sure.
I think one of the resets, I agree with you, and it's a brilliant piece by Johnny, one of the resets will have to be about how the game treats fans. And this concept, you know, we've all written about it, the possibility when football does come back or tries to come back, of behind closed doors. Behind closed doors has to be resisted, first and foremost, because every ambulance is needed by the NHS. But secondary, and very much, you know, with a long distance for that, is that football, you know, it's the Germans always say it, you know, they come and play their Champions League games in our country and their fans hold up these banners and they make the point that football without fans is nothing. Fans are being charged too much, particularly at a time when so much broadcaster revenue is coming in, particularly at the top end. You know, the Football Supporters Association have this campaign, 20's plenty. Some clubs try to get away with sort of £30 for travelling fans. It's too much. And actually, the whole point about games behind closed doors. There were a couple of the Europa League games the other night, Manchester United and Wolves were playing. Yeah, and I just finish off on that. I watched them and I was just like, how soulless this is. And I felt for the players because they were actors on a stage without an audience. Who do you perform to? Okay, there were television cameras there, but you need the backdrop of the fans. So coming back to Ollie's point, if there is a reset, I hope it begins with a proper appreciation of fans, how they provide the backdrop, how they provide the emotion, how they provide the noise, which obviously television pays handsomely for, that they reduce the ticket prices, and particularly in the 18 to 24 age group, which is always squeezed for so many reasons, jobs, trying to get on the property ladder, students coming out of school, whatever. And they're the ones who often generate a lot of the noise. So I hope if the reset does come, it starts with a proper respect for fans and what they contribute to the game.
It's a slightly sad indictment, though, is it not, of the game, if we need a huge health crisis to prompt a reset.
But it's a classic case of the game reflecting society in the same way suddenly a very right-wing government is suddenly embracing all sorts of socialist principles. It's the exact same with football, where suddenly it takes a crisis to expose what were live issues. And I mean, it's an amazing thing. It's only 2 weeks ago that Agnelli was talking about all sorts of reforms to the Champions League that favour the wealthiest clubs, and now we're more specifically looking at the obscenity of where the money is going in the game, and potentially clubs going to the wall, where the richest will have to basically show a lot more solidarity.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in part 3 of the show. We're going to be asking whether the Premier League and its players should be doing more. Some are already doing something, of course, but should they be doing more to help out those lower down the football pyramid? That's next.